Hi guys, let's talk about the hook called useReducer. So useReducer is an alternative solution to useState. So when your component, your app component state becomes so complex to manage, if you have a deep level of logic on the state, then you use the useReducer. So until now we've seen useState in this component. You see app component, and using state we are setting up the incrementing and decrementing the counter. So what it looks like in the app, see, it's incrementing and then you can also decrement. So we're doing that logic using useState. This is pretty simple logic, but if it becomes more complex, that's when you use useReducer. But for the proof of concept purposes, let's use the same implementation and see how we can do this using useReducer, right? So useReducer is like any other hook. It's a function, right? It takes a reducer and the initial state as the arguments, right? So before that, let's import useReducer from React hooks, and then so basically what it returns, useReducer, it returns state and then dispatch function, right? Which is what you dispatch when you do some events, right? So useReducer, and then useReducer takes reducer. Okay, reducer is a function again. We have not defined that yet. We'll define that in a bit. And then it also takes an initial state. For example, here we can say counter 0. Let's say that is our state variable, right? So since we have not defined the reducer, it just read out. Let's define the reducer, right? So reducer is a function, okay, and then it takes the argument state and then action. So we switch on action dot type, right? And then we case on, let's say we are going to send decrement, and then the second case is increment, right? Let's say we are handling these two types, right? And then in the default, let's say we're gonna throw new error, right? So what do we do in the decrement? So when we decrement, what we can do, basically we get the current state and then we need to return the new state here. So that would be counter equal to state dot counter plus -1. So because we are decrementing the counter, right? In the increment, we will do the similar logic, but it would be increment state dot counter plus 1, right? This is the reducer function. So we define the reducer here. So and initial state, we are just passing it from here, right? And then let's see how we can use this state instead of the component state here. So currently we are using component state counter, which is coming from our component state. So let's remove that and let's call this state dot counter, okay? And then what you're doing, when we click on that, we're calling set counter function, which is again coming from useState. Instead, let's call dispatch here. Let's comment out that and then dispatch. What are we going to dispatch? We're going to dispatch the type of action. So it would be object, and the type would be what is that? We're gonna call here action.type, and we can define the type. It could be this one is increment, is it? Increment, right? So we can pass the type would be increment. This is the action type, and then we call dispatch on the decrement. So dispatch, we pass the type here as well, and then this would be decrement. So what happened so far? Within this component, instead of using the component level state, we are using reducer, right? So reducer, useReducer is a function. We pass reducer to this, which is again function, which takes state and action, and based on the action type, we are acting on different events, right? And we pass the initial state to that reducer, right? And this is returning state and dispatch, and we use the state dot counter and then on click dispatch calling. So if everything you have done right, then this should function automatically, right? Let's test it out. Let's click on increment, right? See, it's working. So it's a similar functionality, but we implemented that using reducer. To make sure that it is working, let's console.log here. So the decrement, right? And then same thing with increment. So just to prove that it is really calling the reducer, okay? Then console, see the increment, it came here with the increment type, and then it incremented the value and returned the new state. That state comes back to the component in this state, and then we are using that state.counter. So this is a pretty simple implementation of useReducer, and from this you can build whatever complex logic you would like to. Right here you could have much complex logic on the state. And also this is pretty useful. The useReducer is when that if your next state depends on the previous state, it would be a great example where you could use this state and then do the logic on top of that and comes up with a new state. So here we are passing the state, initializing the state from useReducer function. So this ability it is advantageous, because let's say if your initial state depends on the props that's coming to the component, then this would be the best place that you could define the initial state. And we know in Redux and Reducer concept, sometimes basically the pattern is you define the initial state here, but you will lose the ability of leveraging the state that comes from the props. Okay, so that's why it's not encouraged to do that way. So that will be passed here. And then you could also there are other ways you could initialize the state, lazy initialization. So basically you will pass as a function. Okay, so but we can talk about that later. For now, understand the concept of the reducer, and we will meet in the next video. See you, bye.